No one ever tells you this part. They tell you to be kind. They tell you to be loving. They tell you to be patient, understanding, forgiving. And you learn, you really do. You learn how to feel other people, how to read the room, how to notice when someone is tired, upset, distant, overwhelmed. You learn how to adjust yourself, to soften your voice, to choose the right moment, to carry more than your share quietly. And from the outside, it looks like love. But inside, something strange starts to happen. You begin to disappear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, no collapse, no breakdown, just slowly. You stop asking what you feel. You stop noticing when you're tired. You stop checking in with yourself. Because somewhere along the way, you learned a dangerous lesson, that loving others means leaving less space for yourself. And at first, it feels noble. It feels mature. It feels right. Until one day you realize you're incredibly good at loving everyone else and deeply confused about how to stay with yourself. You don't feel angry. You don't feel dramatic. You don't even feel sad in a clear way. You just feel hollow, like a house that's always warm for guests, but empty when the door finally closes. And the hardest part, you don't know when it happened. You don't remember choosing this. You just know you've been living here for a while. This is where most women think something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong with you. Something was never explained. You know what hurts the most? Not when someone leaves, not when they disappoint you, but when you realize you've been doing everything right and still feel completely alone. You listened. You explained yourself calmly. You tried to be patient. You gave people time. You lowered your expectations. And somehow, the result was always the same. You were still the one waiting, still the one adjusting, still the one wondering what else you need to fix in yourself. And this is the moment most women never talk about out loud, because it sounds ugly, because it sounds selfish, because it sounds like something you're not supposed to think. But I'm going to say it anyway. Sometimes the problem is not that you're asking for too much. The problem is that you're surrounded by people who benefit from you asking for less. Let that land. Because if you're always the understanding one, always the forgiving one, always the flexible one, then someone else is always the comfortable one. And comfort kills connection. This is where the quiet betrayal happens. Not from them, from you, toward yourself. You start editing your feelings before they're even spoken. You rehearse your pain so it doesn't sound dramatic. You shrink your needs so they don't feel inconvenient. And over time, something dangerous happens. You stop trusting your own reactions. You stop believing your own discomfort. You start asking yourself, am I too sensitive? Am I overreacting? Is this really worth bringing up? And the scariest part, you don't notice when it happens, because on the outside, you look calm, mature, emotionally intelligent. But inside, you're slowly disappearing. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because you were never taught that being easy to live with is not the same as being loved. And here's the turn you might not be ready for. Some people don't leave when you suffer quietly. They leave when you stop being convenient. That's when the real test begins. There is a moment no one warns you about. It doesn't come with drama. It doesn't come with shouting. It doesn't come with doors slamming or cruel words. It comes quietly. It comes when you suddenly realize that the version of you people love is not the real you. It's the adapted you, the softer you, the quieter you, the version that learned when to stay silent, the version that learned when to smile instead of speak. And this is where it gets dangerous, Because the more you adapt, the more disconnected you become from yourself, and the more confused you become about why nothing feels fulfilling anymore. You start asking the wrong questions. Why don't I feel close to anyone? Why do conversations feel empty? Why do I feel lonely even when I'm not alone? But the real question is this: when was the last time someone truly met you? Not the version that makes everything easier for them. Most women don't lose relationships because they're too much. They lose themselves because they learned how to be less emotional, less demanding, less honest, less visible. And here's the brutal truth no one likes to say out loud. People don't pull away when you become needy. They pull away when you stop being predictable. When you stop absorbing discomfort for everyone else. When you stop explaining away your pain. When you stop being endlessly understanding. That's when the shift happens. Suddenly you're different. Suddenly you're harder to talk to. Suddenly you're not the same anymore. And you think you did something wrong. But what actually happened is that you stopped betraying yourself. This is the moment where many women panic. They feel the distance grow. They feel the silence stretch. They feel the subtle withdrawal. And out of fear, they rush back into old habits. They soften again. They apologize again. They minimize themselves again. Because being abandoned feels more terrifying than being invisible. But here's what no one ever told you. If your presence is only valued when you're quiet, that was never closeness. That was convenience. And convenience always leaves the moment it costs something. This is the part where the story usually ends in movies. But in real life, this is where everything actually begins. Because the woman who sees this cannot unsee it. And once you realize that love should not require self-erasure, going back feels impossible. There is a moment every woman reaches that no one prepares her for. It doesn't look dramatic. There is no breakup, no explosion, no clear tragedy. From the outside, everything looks normal. She is functioning. She is needed. She is useful. She is doing fine. But inside, something quietly disappears. Not all at once, not loudly. Piece by piece. She starts to notice that her life is built entirely around reactions. Reacting to someone's needs. Reacting to expectations. Reacting to disappointment. Reacting to guilt. And slowly, without realizing it, she stops initiating anything that belongs to her. She doesn't ask herself what she wants anymore. She asks what would cause the least conflict, what would keep the peace, what would make her good enough. And this is the most dangerous place a woman can live in, because it feels safe, but it is not alive. Over time, she begins to confuse love with self-erasure. She tells herself, if I love deeply, I must sacrifice deeply. If I care, I must endure. If I leave space for myself, I am selfish. And so she tightens herself smaller and smaller until her entire existence fits inside other people's comfort. She becomes reliable, predictable, emotionally available, and completely absent from her own life. The tragedy is not that others take too much. The tragedy is that she stops noticing she has the right to remain complex, to remain tired, to remain unfinished, to remain human. Love was never meant to require disappearance. But when a woman grows up learning that love is conditional, that she is loved when she is quiet, patient, accommodating, she learns to abandon herself before anyone else can. And no one sees it happening. Not her partner, not her children, sometimes not even her friends, because she is still there, smiling, supporting, holding everything together, except herself. And the cost of this doesn't arrive immediately. It arrives later as emptiness, as resentment she feels ashamed of, as exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, as a quiet grief she cannot name. This is not a failure of character. This is what happens when a woman is taught to be everything except a place where she herself can rest. And until this is seen, clearly, honestly, nothing truly changes, because you cannot heal what you keep calling normal. At some point, a woman realizes something unsettling. It's not that she is unhappy in a dramatic way, it's that she feels detached from her own life. She looks at the choices she makes and notices they are no longer choices, they are automatic responses. She says yes before she checks in with herself. She agrees before she understands what it costs her. She adapts so quickly that her own resistance never even has time to speak. And this is where the real fracture happens, because the problem is not that she gives too much. The problem is that she no longer feels herself giving. She feels herself disappearing into obligation. Love starts to feel heavy. Care starts to feel like pressure. Connection starts to feel like responsibility instead of desire. And then guilt enters the room, because she tells herself, good women don't feel this way. Grateful women don't question this. Strong women don't need space. So she doesn't say anything. She swallows the discomfort. She normalizes the exhaustion. She explains it away as stress, hormones, timing, phases. But the body does not lie. The body begins to resist in quiet ways. She feels tension where there used to be warmth. She feels irritation where there used to be patience. She feels numb where there used to be desire. And the most confusing part? Nothing is wrong enough to justify leaving. There is no villain, no obvious abuse, no clear reason she can point to and say, this is why. So she stays, and she learns how to survive without being present. She becomes efficient at managing emotions, other people's emotions. She becomes skilled at holding space for everyone but herself. She becomes admired for her strength, a strength that is slowly hollowing her out. What breaks her is not pain. What breaks her is self-betrayal repeated over time. Small moments where she doesn't speak. Small moments where she ignores her own signals. Small moments where she convinces herself it doesn't matter. Until one day she realizes she no longer trusts herself. Not because she is weak, but because she has practiced abandoning herself so consistently that it has become instinct. And this is the part no one talks about. You cannot heal this by resting more. You cannot heal this by being more grateful. You cannot heal this by trying harder. Because the wound is not exhaustion. The wound is the loss of inner authority, the quiet realization that she has been living as a guest in her own life. And the fear that follows is not, what if I lose them? It is, what if I never come back to myself? This is the moment everything starts to shift. Not outwardly, not yet, but inwardly something wakes up. A question she can no longer silence. And once that question appears, there is no returning to the version of herself that didn't hear it. There is a moment when a woman stops asking, "What is wrong with me?" and starts asking a far more dangerous question. What have I been trained to tolerate? This moment doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't come with courage or confidence. It comes with clarity. She suddenly sees the pattern, not just in one relationship, not just in one role, but everywhere. She sees how often she adjusts herself before anyone asks her to, how quickly she minimizes her needs so the atmosphere stays calm, how deeply she learned that love is something you earn by being easier, quieter, more understanding. And the realization is painful because no one forced her to disappear. She participated out of love, out of fear, out of the belief that being chosen meant being flexible. This is where most narratives stop. They tell her to love herself more. They tell her to set boundaries. They tell her to choose herself. But none of that explains the real problem. Because the real problem is not that she doesn't know what she wants. The real problem is that she learned to distrust wanting. Somewhere early on, she absorbed the idea that her inner world was inconvenient, that her emotions were too much, that her needs created tension instead of connection. So she learned to pre-edit herself. She filtered her reactions. She softened her truth. She learned how to read the room before reading herself. And over time, something subtle but devastating happened. She stopped experiencing herself as a source of authority. Her feelings became negotiable. Her intuition became optional. Her inner no became a suggestion instead of a decision. This is why self-love feels abstract to her, because how do you love something you are not allowed to trust? The turning point does not come when she becomes stronger. It comes when she becomes honest, when she admits, quietly, without drama, that she has been loyal to others at the cost of being loyal to herself, and that this loyalty has a price. The price is resentment that has nowhere to go. The price is fatigue that sleep cannot fix. The price is a life that looks stable from the outside and feels strangely hollow on the inside. Here is the truth no one prepares her for. Choosing herself does not feel empowering at first. It feels terrifying. Because the moment she stops abandoning herself, something shifts in the system. People notice. Dynamics change. Silences appear where compliance used to be. And this is where the old fear rises. What if I become difficult? What if I lose them? What if I am no longer loved? But underneath that fear is something even deeper. What if I finally hear myself and can no longer pretend I didn't? This is the real threshold, not between love and selfishness, but between self-betrayal and self-presence. She begins with something small. She pauses before answering. She notices the tension in her body instead of overriding it. She allows discomfort to exist without rushing to fix it. And slowly, something extraordinary happens. Her inner voice becomes clearer, not louder, clearer. She doesn't need to prove herself. She doesn't need to justify her limits. She doesn't need to explain why something doesn't feel right. She starts to trust that feeling itself is enough. This is not the end of love. This is the end of love that requires her disappearance. And here is the quiet, radical truth. The people who can only love her when she abandons herself were never loving her to begin with. They were loving her usefulness, her flexibility, her silence. What remains after the fear is something steadier. A woman who is no longer negotiating her existence. A woman who understands that closeness without self-respect is not intimacy. A woman who realizes that staying connected to herself is the foundation of every real relationship. This is not a resolution. This is a beginning. Because once she stops leaving herself, she starts to see everything differently. And the next question is no longer about love. It is about what happens when she finally lives from the inside out. That is where the next story begins. There is something no one warns her about after she stops abandoning herself. The silence. Not the peaceful kind, the unfamiliar kind. The silence where old dynamics no longer work, where people don't respond the same way, where she notices how much of her life was built around being predictable. This is where the real disorientation begins, because she didn't just change her behavior, she changed her position, and now the world is reacting. Some connections grow quieter. Some conversations feel unfinished. Some people seem unsure how to meet her now that she is no longer shrinking. This is the part no one romanticizes, the space between who she was and who she hasn't fully become yet. The moment when strength doesn't feel strong, it feels exposed. She starts to wonder, if I'm not who I used to be, then who am I now? And even more unsettling, what if I don't recognize the life that was built around my silence? This is where many women panic and return to old patterns, not because they were happy there, but because it was familiar. But what if this confusion is not a mistake? What if this in-between state is not loss, but recalibration? In the next episode, we will talk about what happens after the awakening, when clarity doesn't bring relief, but responsibility, when freedom doesn't feel light, but lonely, when a woman realizes that choosing herself means rebuilding her life from a different center. And the question is no longer, how do I stop disappearing, but how do I live without asking permission to exist? That is where we go next.